And we're live.
And we're live. So this is Rico from Puerto Rico, and I am coming to you guys live on my podcast, Visionary Living, and I am featuring a very awesome guest with me today, Keegan. Keegan, please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. That was such a great introduction. Appreciate that. Thank you. Hi, I'm Keegan Mills, and I am here to talk about a lot of beautiful things on this Visionary Living podcast. I am a yoga teacher, life coach, been doing leadership trainings, leadership development for a number of years. I'm also a doula. So,
Oh, what's that?
ooh, doula. That got you excited?
Yeah.
Doula is a birth coach, basically.
Oh, wow.
So I work with families and specifically the pregnant person in supporting them through the delivery of their baby, but
wow.
usually coaching families before, during, and after labor.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I didn't even know you had that under you.
Yeah.
So yeah, why don't you guys just stay tuned as we're going into our podcast, and we're going to be discussing illuminating thyself. So what does that mean? What does it look? What does it mean to look inward? And hopefully in our conversation we can create some awesome value for you guys today. So just stay tuned as we start the podcast. So coming back to Visionary Living. So this podcast, Visionary Living, I've dedicated a podcast towards conversations that illuminate how we can live from a place of power. So what does it mean to live from a place of power? Well, in my humble opinion, I find that having a vision or being a visionary, and like, what does that mean? I've actually gotten acknowledgments from strangers before that say, man, you're visionary. And for me, for someone who hasn't done like leadership work and like all that language pops up, it's like, what does that mean? You know? And so as someone acknowledges me for being visionary and having an expansive mind, the way that I can see the future is like, I can see the possibilities. I could see more possibilities than most. And then it's about seeing the path. What does it take to get to this possibility that I'm committed to? So for me, visionary, I want to start teaching visionary. I want to like allow others to step into what that means. And when I say visionary living, and you know, I don't mean that living a life of circumstances is bad, right? Because if we circumstantially would come into millions of dollars, well, I hope that your vision changes slightly, you know what I mean, to accommodate that. But so it's definitely beneficial to have circumstantial living too. But what is it, and what does it mean to be visionary and to step fully and wholeheartedly into one path? So that's kind of like where I want to take our conversation today. And you know, what opens up for you when I start talking about that? Like, what's the forefront of your mind?
Oh man, so much. That's really my jam. That's
okay.
Just in the sense, I mean, I think it was probably about 6 years ago. Yeah, it's just so powerful to think about it in that sense, you know, in the sense of standing in a place of power. And I got to experience a leadership program a number of years ago, about 7 years ago. And a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, had come back and he was like, Keegan, and I've been doing leadership programs in colleges and universities. That's my background, actually.
Oh, okay.
And he had come back and he said, Keegan, I need you have got to go to this experience. It's going to transform you. And so I really admired him as a colleague. I went, and it was exactly that. It was thinking about how to be visionary,
Mm.
and not thinking about it, but actually talking about it. It was having conversations that matter with people,
Mm-hmm.
dropping into what our passions are, what our values are, changing the conversation, the context of our conversation. I believe that, I think we kind of walk around the world having surface level conversations and don't really drop in to think about, like, what are you really passionate about? Like, what drives you? What motivates you? What do you get up in the morning and you're just so excited to
And
do?
you know, it's funny. I totally want to speak into that because I'm the guy that makes friends with complete strangers no matter where I
Mhm.
go. So if I'm on the subway in New York City, I'm like, "Hey, man, what's your name?" Like
Mhm.
I almost look like the crazy guy on the train. I swear. And having this kind of background, also, I realize that I like to take the conversations deep, and I like to
Mhm.
go there really quickly. Like
Mhm.
within 10 minutes at Denny's with the hostess at the front, we're already crying with each other about what your vision is for your life. So
Mhm.
I totally get that, like taking it to a deeper conversation, and what
Mhm.
the power is for people and in communicating. What are we learning from each other? What are we teaching each other? And if every opportunity in life and every moment to moment was an opportunity to learn and grow, are we really
Mhm.
focusing ourselves on stuff that develops our mind and stimulates our thoughts? Or are we really kind of, like you said, keeping it surface and not, what does that create? Surface
Mhm.
level conversations.
Well, I think it creates disconnection.
Hmm.
I think it creates isolation
Hmm.
and loneliness and comparison. Um, yeah, those are the things I think of.
Well, it's funny. So that brings up something for me. So in my successful awareness workshop, we actually talk about something that I call isolation theory, right?
Mhm.
And quickly, I'll kind of go into a little experiment that was done back in the 70s. So back in the 70s, there was this experiment done where the scientist took a bunch of rats and he put all the rats in individual cages, and then he gave each cage 2 bottles of water. One had just regular water in it, and the other one had drugs in it of some kind. I think it was heroin or
Mm.
cocaine. And so what he started to watch what the rats would do, and like some crazy astronomical number, like 90 something percent of the rats, all of them pretty much would get addicted to the drugs. And most of them would continue to drink it and drink and drink until they died. And then some could regulate it, but they were wholly on that. They were fully into the drugs.
Mhm.
And so the scientists started to make assessments about addiction based on that. And so another scientist comes in and takes a look at the experiment and the way that it's controlled. And the scientist goes, well, duh, they're going to get addicted to the drugs. They're in jail
Mhm.
cells.
Yeah.
You put me in
What
jail and
else?
say, hey, you want sobriety or some drugs? What
Yeah,
do you think I'm going to
of
choose?
course.
And so they proceeded to create what's called Rat Park. And this
Mm.
experiment, you could look it up. It's called Rat Park.
Mm.
And so what they did was they created this little like playground where they put toys and tunnels and all kinds of fun stuff. And then they took a sample of the rats that were already addicted to the drugs and put
Mhm.
them together in the park. And then
Mm.
once again gave them 2 bottles of water, one that had just water and one that had drugs in it.
Mm.
And then they watched what happened. And what do you think happened?
Mm. I think they went for the drugs.
You would think that they went for the drugs, right? Well, what actually happened was once they created a social structure, a community, they had friends, they had toys, they had other rats to play with and procreate with and all of that.
Mhm.
Now the stimuli was different, and another astronomical number or percentage of the rats start to kick their addiction completely.
Mm.
So the rats that were already addicted to these drugs based on their experiences now in this environment kicked their addiction, and the percentage of rats that didn't, they regulated without like killing themselves,
Interesting.
right?
Yeah.
So then they inferred from that
Yeah.
that addictive behavior really comes from isolation.
Mm.
It comes from that
Mhm.
feeling of not having
Mhm.
support, not having structure, not having a community,
Mhm.
not having purpose. And so if you can have that community, then you have that support, then you can kick your addictive behaviors.
Mhm.
And this is what I find, this is what I call isolation theory, which is when human beings get in their shit,
Mhm. Mhm.
we choose it.
Yeah.
We then choose to back away from the people that we love. We don't
Mhm.
ask for support. We close off. We ignore
Mhm.
text messages and phone calls, and we lock our bedroom, put on Netflix, and
Mhm.
try and hide from the world.
And I think we also get something out of that in a way.
What do you mean?
Like,
Like,
it
where do you
feels
go with
good
that?
to, well, I think of it in the sense that it sometimes feels easier. Like it's soothing to just disconnect in a way. I think it's harder to actually go out into the world because you're having to actually like
Be
seen and maybe even connect.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it makes sense. There's
I don't know.
something scary in connection almost.
Yeah, I think there's something scary in connection because I think that I think our world there's been a feeling that you have to perform. You have to be, you can't be suffering,
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like on social media, we always post the good stuff, but we're not like, man, I'm having a bad day. Or at least a smaller percentage of people are willing to be seen in that vulnerable sense,
Yeah.
Huh. And so how do we bring this conversation back to illuminating thyself?
That's a good question. Let me think about that.
Right.
Well, I think of it in the sense of, I think it's in the sense of that self-awareness, what you're giving the example of with the rat experiment.
Right.
What was it called? Rat Park?
Rat Park. Yeah.
The Rat Park experiment is we have a choice. We have a choice and we get to have awareness around that choice. And I think that illuminating the self is being able to go onto that self-discovery path of identifying when are the ways that I'm in my shit, I'm suffering, or I'm deciding to disconnect. I'm choosing to disconnect. And what does support look like to me, or how can I transform this? How can I transmute this experience into something better or something different for myself?
Right. Yeah, I feel like illuminating the self is kind of like looking at my own behaviors and my own participation in the results that I have. And not saying that it's my fault per se, but like from a place of like, okay, if I were the one generating my life, then how am I producing these results, or how am I interacting with the world that would have this show up in my space? And I feel like a lot of people are afraid to look at themselves because we're in that fault or blame game type of society. So it ends up becoming like, oh well, if I'm producing the results, then it's my fault that I'm miserable, or that I don't have the dream life that I say that I want, or that it's impossible for me to accomplish. You know what I mean?
And then I think it goes into that downward spiral of just like self-hate, and then that goes into the isolation because you start to go down that path of the blaming game, which turns into, we have a society of blame and shame. It's in our media, it's everywhere. It's in, everywhere you look, it's in blaming and shaming. We have a context of politics that's like one side or the other, and it's always this us and them. And that's where the community comes in, I think, in terms of how can we connect folks not only to themselves, but also to each other, to recognize we're all in this same boat together. We're not, there's not, one person better than the other. We're all kind of going down this.
Yeah. And it, like, just to speak into that too, like, when we divide ourselves by religion or by countries or by, nationalities or what have you, it's like, honestly, we're all on the same planet. And if an asteroid hits us, we're all dead. We're Team Earth, Is there a way we could do that?
Yes. And I think, it sounds very idealistic. I think I get a lot of criticism sometimes about, oh, that's so idealistic. And, but actually, if we really boil down to it, we're all human beings and we all desire the same things generally.
To laugh.
Yeah. And how can we?
Food.
Yeah. Food. Absolutely.
The bathroom.
Absolutely. Food. Absolutely. Bathroom. Absolutely. Yes. We all desire to, deal with our needs, sleep, and connection, I think, is one of the biggest things.
Yeah.
And I think connection to ourselves leads us to connection to other people. If we're so disconnected with ourselves, and I think that's where the challenges come in, is that we don't even realize that we're in these spaces.
Yeah. And what actually brings up for me when you say that is disconnecting with thyself creates disconnecting with others. It's almost like, there we go with illuminating myself is, okay, how is what I'm producing within internally now showing up in the space out externally,
Mm-hmm.
so if I'm disconnected from other people, it's got to be because I don't have self-love. It's
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not seeing myself in a powerful place. So if I'm
Mm-hmm.
not powerful, then I'm not worthy or deserving to
Mm-hmm.
be seen.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you were talking about coming, thinking about, I can't remember what you had said, but it was about the choices, or not seeing ourselves as responsible,
Right.
seeing us as responsible. And I think that's where you're when you're coming from a place of power, when you're coming from a place of self-love, you're coming from that place of responsibility, but not blaming yourself, and
Right.
recognizing that you have the responsibility to change it. Like, you have the power to change it.
Right.
And I know in my own process of that, it's been a lot of reflection and asking myself questions like, what's the lesson here?
Mm.
What is this teaching me right now in my life to get me to that next place? Rather than the, woe is me, life sucks.
Yeah. Victim
It's
mode.
always going to be like this, or here we go again.
Right.
And you can do that. And I've done that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're all,
Well, that's just wanting to be right about your ability to predict the outcome. So
for
if
sure.
if you already knew it was going to be a bad day, as if you knowing it in advance, premeditating it was like justification
Mm-hmm.
that it was coming.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed
Mm-hmm.
to what's the silver lining in this, or how can
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is an opportunity for me to exercise my superpower and shift the energy to
Mm-hmm.
have my vision come out,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to the circumstance that is, man, this situation sucks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think for me, I mean, just to speak personally about this, I think one of the things that I've had that breakthrough in that regard is shifting my mindset
Mm,
and shifting, the intention. And, it's like, I love that you talked about strangers, because I think it's so powerful when we open ourselves up to other people
yeah, totally.
and we like let down our guard and let down, just let go of like that fear of connection, that fear of like, oh, what does this person want from me? Or, what is,
Well, we're now, what that opens up for me is that people like to predict, right? It's almost like we like to be right about our predictions. So when it comes to predicting human behavior, we'll look at a person crossing the street or something like that in our space, and then our mind goes to, okay, wait, based on the context that I see, based on what they're wearing, based on how they look, let me assess. I'll use that instead of judge.
that's
Let me
a nice way to
assess
say it. Assess.
and match them up to my prediction of who they are, or what they're about, or what they bring. And then based on that prediction, it has to be true. And so if it's true, then I've already predicted my own behavior in relationship to this person. And so in that, I've never allowed the person to have an opportunity to be different than my expectation. Because now I'm either going to avoid them, or I'm going to interact with them in a reactive way. So it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. My mind's blowing a little bit. I mean, that's true though. I mean, there's so many experiences I can think about that, in terms of, it's like having me really take a moment to think about, how do I show up in those ways? And I think that's where the self-awareness for me comes in place. It's like, okay, I can take that and now I can use that the next time I experience somebody, and I think that's part of it is the non-judgment in a way.
Right.
Non-assessment.
Yeah. I mean, assessment and judgment, there's a distinction there, because an assessment is neutral, and a judgment puts emotional charges in place. Yeah. So if we can truly be neutral about the assessment, and then also be willing to be wrong about our assessment, like that's not just a fact that, oh, this guy walking with tattoos is probably X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean? Or judging on based on the color of someone's skin, or their sexual identity, and what they prefer, and any of that really.
Why do you think we don't want to be wrong?
I honestly believe that what it boils down to is a safety protocol. There's, I talk about these two distinct thought systems that we possess, and that one of them is very egoic, and its design is really to keep us safe. And in order to keep us safe, we have to, be defending against something. And in order to defend against something, we have to be under attack. So it's almost like one thought system. Everything that we listen to is filtered through are we being attacked, and how do we keep ourselves safe. And so when someone gives you a look or says something, that thought system or that voice all of a sudden goes into their judgments of like, well, what does that mean? And what is that supposed to mean? And where were you going with that? And then there's this other thought system that's just like, oh, okay, cool. Like, it's a very simple, like, loving, peaceful thought system. And if we could really pledge allegiance to that voice or that thought system, what a different world or what a different relationship we'd have to the world,
Yeah, it makes me think of also like fear, like the fear that we hold. And I also think, you brought up, all these separations that we have. And I think part of that is that fear, maybe fear of being caught, like figured out in a way, like, oh, I'm just trying to be safe here. I'm fearful to let go of whatever was before.
And like you said too, that we want to look powerful, like we want to be seen as powerful. And so when we're in our vulnerable states, we hide or we close off.
Yeah. I definitely, I think we want to look good. We want to look like everything's put together. I think a lot of that is, again, what we put out in the world, what's out in the world. And especially like with my birth work, that's a lot of it. It's like, what should a typical, for women, it's really challenging because they're kind of told this is what your birth should look like. And I actually was introduced to doula work a number of years ago. My friend was pregnant, and this is before I even knew what a doula was. And
What'd you call me?
She was pregnant, and so I was just talking to her about her pregnancy, and she said, yeah, I'm going all natural. I'm not going to have any medication, non-medicated birth. And she said, I don't really tell anybody that because I get so many people telling me like what I should be doing. And so it started to plant the seed in terms of the challenges that are out there in terms of how you should be, what you should be doing, the messages you receive on the programming that you receive throughout your entire life of what it should look like what your life should look like. And I think there's so many people walking through this world that are following these orders or following this script that somebody else wrote for them.
Right.
And they're so lost in figuring out what their script for themselves is. And I think that's one of the things that I love about birth work is being able to work with clients to support them in identifying what is the birth of their choice. How do they want to, and not only that, but also for me is to be able to support them in bringing a baby in the world with love and kindness and unconditional love and peace and harmony.
And what's interesting is when you say, when you spoke into like how people have these expectations of what life should look like. Like what that brings me to is that whole ideology of like what's right and wrong. And if there's a right and a wrong, then there is a perfect way to live your life, and I feel like my dad always had that perspective of like, okay, you're going to go to college, you get your degree. Once you get your degree, you'll get your real job. When you get your real job, you find a woman, have kids, have your house. And that's like your pretty little cookie
American
cutter
family. Yes. Yes. American dream. There we go.
Exactly. And I definitely didn't take that route. I was a serial entrepreneur very early. And I was just a lover of life, and I wanted to travel and experience, and I remember I had some feedback from one of my aunts and my grandmother and my dad says this too sometimes of like, oh man, I gave you too much freedom as a kid. And for me, like, on the surface level, I gave you too much freedom as a kid can be just taken as like, oh, okay, well, what does that mean really? So there is no surface level really. What does that imply? To me, what it implies is that who I am right now is not okay. And if who I am right now is not okay, and I gave you too much freedom as a kid, it's like what you're implying is that I'm a mess up, I'm a fuck up, or, the way that I'm living my life is not in a way that's okay, or, what I mean? So there's like a resistance.
Who am I supposed to be? Like, that's a question I would think is who am I supposed to be then?
Right. And, and I asked the question like, hey, are you proud of who I am right now and what I'm doing in my life? Yeah. Then you didn't give me enough, too much freedom, because it occurred to this point now of who I am now. And I'm a functional person in society, working and contributing, and you know what I mean? So, what are we implying by when we want to change the past?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, question I think of is I think of in the sense of, I wonder if that is also about your dad and
Hmm.
how the expectations that he has feels on himself about who he is as a father. And you know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
that like that almost like ripple effect, you know, in the sense of what parents are supposed to produce.
Right. Like there's an expectation for them as a parent
Yeah.
to be a
Yeah.
certain way or to have produced a certain type of
Result.
result for their children.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. So then it's like identifying as a winner or a failure as a parent based on what your child's results are.
Yeah. And I think of that in the sense of the right and the wrong.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
that sense.
And, you know, when I think about it, like, you know, are there kids who are living a very luxurious life, maybe multi-million-dollar families, and they, you know, they're catered to, and is that right or wrong, versus the kid who's got to walk 5 miles to grab water for their families, you know, and everything in between.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, and is there really a right or wrong way? No, because I
No.
feel like as we grow up, as we age, we'll find our way.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I think so. I think
Yeah.
we're all finding our way back to that.
Yeah.
Like very innocent child self, the one that wasn't thrown all the expectations or who I should be. And I relate a little bit to your story in the sense that, you know, well, in the sense of I followed the path of like, this is what I should be doing. And it took me a while to start to unravel some of that, to figure out, actually, I don't need to have this traditional life. And I played around with trying non-traditional things, and I was like, I really like this. This works for me. Yeah, this works for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting reflecting back on that and how, you know, this is the path that you take, and this what you're told.
Right.
And being able to go against that. I think that's, to me, that's the visionary part.
Yeah.
It's going against the grain of what society or what you've been told.
And my dad always taught me growing up, if you want to be successful, watch the masses and do the opposite. You know what I mean? It's almost like you want to be the sore thumb. You want to be the oddball out,
For
you
sure.
know? There's almost pride in that. People see you when you are daring.
Yes.
Daring to dream, daring to risk, daring to go for whatever you're afraid to go for normally.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Whew, and it's scary. It's scary.
Yeah.
Like for me, it brings a little knot in my stomach every time. Every time.
What part?
What part of my stomach?
No. No, part of that brings you a little bit of tension.
Well, because I mean, there's criticism. You know, I mean, it's there's so many haters out there. So it's, you know, it's kind of like anytime you're going against the stream of things, and it's like, so I've read a lot of Brene Brown's work. Incredible. I don't know, have you gotten into her work?
Not as deeply.
Oh, okay.
So there's a whole nother, I'm interested.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
I just didn't want to speak. Okay. I didn't want to speak on something you were,
go ahead.
already dived into.
Share.
I mean, she speaks to a lot of this. And one of my, she wrote a book called Daring Greatly. And I love it because, I mean, that's what she's speaking to. And she bases it on the FDR quote about daring greatly. And it's about the man standing in the arena. And it's not the, you know, triumphant one. It's actually the one who continues to go into the arena time after time after time. And is, you know, scarred and bloody and just constantly going into the arena. That's the hardest part of it, you know, is going into it, because you know what you're going, you know, you've been there before,
right?
And you kind of
know what to expect.
And I think that's the hard part, is that you know what to expect, and it's letting go of those expectations,
right? Which kind of goes back to matching other people up to our expectations and how we've already predicted the outcome, and maybe we haven't predicted the outcome but instead produced it based on our expectation.
For sure.
It's almost like a paradox. Like, what came first, my assessment of it, or it was going to happen anyways?
Yeah.
And so I predicted it.
Yeah.
You know?
Chicken egg.
Yeah, chicken egg.
Exactly. Chicken egg. Yeah. But and she also speaks about the gifts, like perfection society. And gifts of imperfection, and how can we embrace imperfection? Yeah. And let go of perfection.
Because what is perfection? Because again, it goes back to there's an ideal standard
Mhm.
of what's
Mhm.
right, and perfection is as close to that standard as
Mhm.
possible. Because even when we talk about averages, right, we're just saying, okay, out of 100% of human beings, 70% exhibit this trait, therefore that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then anything
What about
else
everybody else?
is like, oh, that's a mental disorder,
Mhm.
or that's a physical disorder.
Mhm.
But what if that's right and 70% of people are abnormal, if you
Mhm.
will? Or what?
Mhm.
Why make it an abnormal? Why isn't it
Mhm.
just we're all different and
Mhm.
unique?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are. That's the funny part is that
Yeah.
we are all different and unique.
Right.
There's like no one person that is the same.
Right.
And I was just doing leadership training in California actually, and I was mentioning to the group, I was like, this is the only time that all of you will be here this time right now doing this at this very moment
At
in
this moment,
time.
right.
Like everything before and after changes us. It
Right.
informs who we are and transforms who we are. And so you can never, we are unique individuals. And I think that's, by following that idea of perfectionism, I just had this conversation with my client about this. I asked her that question, what's perfect? And it was the same. It was like, oh, I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is perfect?
Well, what's funny is, just like what you said, it's almost like labeling. Like when we we have concepts that are really labels, and what a label is, at least the way that I have it framed, is it's like a concept, a word, or an idea with conditions that are presumed. They're assumed. It's an assumption. All the conditions that meet that label is an assumption. And when we actually start to question and dive deeper and understand what it is that it really truly means, and we redefine what that concept means or what that word means, then all of a sudden we have a new relationship to how we interact with that. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Totally does. I'm really absorbing that because it's so true. There's so many ways of applying that, I think, in the sense, I think that comes to the self-awareness piece, because I think you have to be ready to be willing to see that. I don't know. I think you have to be ready to, like, willing to see that there's something else other than what you already know.
Something outside of what you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because and speaking into that, what it comes up for me is we used to know nothing at one point, and then we had to learn from others and learn information to then know that it's a truth. But then once we know that information, when new information is presented, it's like we want to, nope, that's not true because I already have the truth.
Yeah.
But the truth is, you came from nothing, learned this concept, so why not continue growing and learn this next concept too? Because that's just the future of society. That's the future of knowledge and learning is growing,
And I think it's recognizing that the basis of who we are is that, one of my favorite, I wouldn't necessarily say this is a yoga teaching or anything, but it's something that I learned through my practice of yoga, is like change is the only constant in life. And it's been the best way for me to move through some of those changes and to be receptive to what you're talking about, is like when I get new information about myself or something that I don't know, or new information about this person, how can I shift what I already knew about them, and recognizing that change is the only constant in our life. And that's what I think of is being open and embracing that. It'd be interesting to see a world that, I don't know, do you think that we have a world that embraces that?
What's interesting is I don't believe in any absolutes. So I wouldn't say that we have a world that is one or the other. I would say that both exist in different proportions, and it just depends on what we're choosing to look at.
Yeah.
Okay, are we looking for the good, or are we looking for who's messing up? And I feel like we'll see whatever we're trained to see, or whatever we're training ourselves to see. Like my background when I went to school and growing up was film production, and I was now trained to see film in the eyes of production. And so from that moment on, once I learned those, once those that came to my awareness, now when I watched a movie, I couldn't get lost in the storyline of who Arthur is and who he's relating to and who he's making love with, or sleeping with, or cheating on. For me, it was like, cool, cut, how many people are in the background of that set. You know
Yeah,
what I
you're
mean?
like
Like,
analyzing the whole, well, not analyzing, but like
yeah,
looking at everything and
analyzing it
being
for
like,
sure.
okay, I noticed this, I noticed that.
Yeah.
I can't even enjoy the movie now because
Yeah.
it's all in my
Well,
head.
I can enjoy it from a different perspective. Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Yeah.
I'm sitting there going, how did they get that take? How did
Yeah.
they produce that? How did they create that special effect?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so the awareness kind of shifts the way that I see things.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what I'm conditioned to look for, am I looking for the good in people or the bad in people?
Oh, yeah, that's deep.
Hmm.
That's deep. And I think, I'm keep going back to this self-awareness.
Yeah.
It's like it's having the self-awareness of recognizing that, because I think it's being able to recognize that we can hold multiple perspectives, we can hold multiple
Truths.
truths, and that there are multiple truths in the world, and it's honoring that. I think that's the process of elevating our consciousness and moving us into a direction of like greater connection with everyone.
Right.
Is seeing all of that and
accepting differences.
Yeah, accepting differences. And I think it would help us,
or maybe even beyond accepting, celebrating differences.
Yeah, celebrating,
Yeah.
acknowledging. Yeah. And I think it'd be interesting to see that. I think we're on a trajectory of that. We're evolving continuously. I mean, like, change is the only constant that I think of.
So going back to visionary living and living out of a vision versus the circumstances that are given to us. I didn't know if there was a personal story that you had that you wanted to share where you kind of used your vision of the end result to overcome the circumstances in your life or whatever someone told you that you couldn't do or could do, or your limitations were, so I don't know if you had one prepared or if not.
How long do you have?
We have some time.
Just kidding.
Yeah, we have some friends.
No, there's so many stories I think of.
And I'd also like to invite anyone who's live with us right now, if you guys have any personal questions that you'd like us to speak into, please feel free to type that into the comments of the chat, and we'll go ahead and address that. Now's a good time for that. But if you have your story that you want to speak into, I'd love to connect that to the podcast, and what the purpose of the podcast truly is.
For sure. Yeah. There's so many stories. I'm thinking about where to start. I'll go quite a few years ago. I'll think about one in particular. And there's a couple of other stories I think about, but so I'm trying to think how many years ago it was. 5 years ago. Yeah, 5 years ago.
So on a cold night,
on a cold
5 years ago,
on a cold San Francisco night.
2014.
Well, it wasn't really cold. I was actually in Santa Barbara. So it was about 5 years ago. I was in a relationship with someone for about 6 years, and we were living together. We went to a wedding. I'd gone to many weddings before, and I'd always seen the father-daughter dance, and I'd never, like, to back up, give context. My relationship with me and my father was was non-existent. It was very toxic. It was very disconnected in many ways. I made a decision 7 years before that to cut him out of my life, to completely just not talk to him anymore. And just thought, that was the best way to move forward.
Right.
And so I was at this wedding, and had been to other weddings in that time with this person who I thought, this is my person. This is the one. This is who I'm going to marry. And I'm watching this father-daughter dance. And for some reason, just this voice or this like thought came to me. And I thought, I think you get to heal your relationship with your father before you move forward with this man next to you. And so that thought came to me, and I had made a decision. That's what I was going to do, because I was
self-awareness.
Yeah.
Illuminating
self-awareness.
myself.
Yeah. And there was, exactly. There was self-awareness there to listen,
right.
to actually listen to that voice, because we all have that intuitive voice within us.
Right.
And we sometimes don't hear it, or we sometimes
choose to ignore it
or doubt
Listen
it.
To ego first.
Yeah. Doubt it. Ego. Exactly. And so, Yeah. So then about a week later, though, we go, we're back from the wedding, and he basically walks out the door
Hmm.
and ends our relationship.
Hmm.
And is like, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. And that was, that's another story. But, um, and so that was kind of tumultuous in the sense of
I
like
bet.
having to live with this person, having this, expectation about moving forward
Of where
and
you're going in life.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
And excuse me. And then I had actually signed up to do a yoga teacher training, and it was starting in a few months.
Hmm.
And I still had that thought in my head to heal my relationship with my father.
Right.
And so even though I wasn't in this relationship
Anymore,
there was no possibility at that time, or I thought there was no possibility for it to, happen. I still had that thought, like, that feeling I should heal this relationship. Like I get to do that. That's something I thought about, and I don't need to give up on that just because I don't have this relationship. And I'd already been on a path of self-discovery and self-awareness and doing a lot of different work around that. And so I went through my yoga teacher training in the middle of it, and I called him up on Thanksgiving that year, 5 years ago. And it was the best conversation we had in 35 years.
That's amazing.
And yeah,
wow,
it was
35
incredible.
years.
It was incredible. Yeah. I mean, that's how old I was at the time. So,
Yeah. But that's a long time though, to not have a good relationship.
Yeah. And not to have the, like the loving, connected relationship with somebody who brought you into the world.
Yeah.
And so from that inspired me to do a lot of other things and to connect with family members more deeply and to really be more connected to family and to do this actual work of healing and ancestral healing and self-love work. And so from that, it just kind of unfolded into all these other things. And actually in my yoga teacher training, which I signed up for not to actually be a yoga teacher, I signed up purely just so I could have a personal practice and to dive deeper into it.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And so, but in that process, it was, I have this, there's these things that I'm noticing about myself, like really wanting to go down this healing path and be, I don't like to use that healer term because I think we're all healers.
Right.
I'm not like a healer, but how can I be a conduit of healing? How can I support people in healing? How can I support people through their transitions of life, through
their journeys,
personal journeys? Yeah, their personal journeys. And so that was one of the ways that really started to get the trajectory of it going pretty quickly. And a lot of other things unfolded, and it actually brought me, I was in San Francisco at the time, and it brought me back to Florida a year ago. One of the ways, like, to be able to go down this path of healing and connecting more with family. And so I have a relationship with my mom now that's healed and loving and so much more open than it ever has been before.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's a
Yeah,
little bit.
it's yeah, thank you. And so that was the vision, and then the vision was heal the relationship with father that you kind of stepped into.
Yeah, that was the vision.
Yeah,
That was the vision.
I noticed in the work that I do, with development, self-development, leadership training, a lot of it also does stem from patterns, human behavior patterns, and like you said, ancestral healing. I speak into epigenetics, and there's like a whole experiment with rats also that maybe I'll share in another time, where you actually pass down our traumas, we pass down our fears, we pass down our beliefs, all in our DNA structure. And so what patterns did I pick up from my dad or my mom with relating to men and women in the world, or with relating to sexuality, or with relating to finances, or with relating to anything really? What patterns did I pick up? Because as a child, or as a teenager, or what have you, I'm going through life and I'm looking at people who are successful, or people who I admire, or just people in general, in order for me to learn as to what I'm supposed to do. Like what I should do, what's the expectation, and so I'll pick up the behavior patterns that I like, or that I admire, or that gets the result that I want to attain. And then I'll reject those behaviors, or those people that exhibit traits that I don't want, or that I don't like, or that I have my own traumas with and my own negative experiences with.
Yes, you like rats.
I love the rats. Well, you know what's
The
interesting
second
is
rat
just
story.
all the
But no, it's all good.
experiments with rats,
Well,
man.
no, they are all, yes, all of the experiments are rats. But I
Yeah.
read something actually. They did. I think it was in the New Yorker. I read it
Mm,
about a community. I can't remember what country it was,
mm,
but it was talking about the famine. Might have been Ireland.
mm.
And how it wasn't the generation, how it skipped a generation. It wasn't the
Yes.
generation that exhibited traits of the famine. So there
Mm-hmm.
was a generation that experienced famine, and then the next generation there was no famine,
Right.
and then the generation after that, so the grandkids
Right.
actually started to behave like they were in a famine.
Oh,
So
wow.
scarcity, and it was speaking to that epigenetics
Yeah.
that like it's passed down, and it was the environment, that the context in which they were living,
Right.
which kind of determined how they were showing up in the world, what they were doing, their
Right. Right.
actions.
Right. Right.
And I think also our thoughts, like, I don't have enough food, yet there's plenty of food, there's abundance of food.
Right.
And I think, yeah, there's so much of that. I think that's where I've really gotten into the ancestral healing, is noticing what are the patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things I really did a lot of work with is like my maternal lineage, and
Mm-hmm.
really taking a look at that and identifying what were the patterns that my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother, and noticing like, oh, that's a self-awareness thing,
Right.
going back to what are those patterns within me? How do I notice that it showed up in my other family members,
Right.
and being able to break some of those.
Mm.
And I think that's also part of the vision as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's the original vision, I believe,
Mm.
that I had a long time ago.
Right.
And that is, I feel like for me, it was that vision that there were a lot of other things that shot off of that,
Mm-hmm.
like all these
Mm-hmm.
other little branches that shot off of that. One of those was, how can I reconnect, have a healed relationship with my father? How
Right.
can I reconnect with other people? How can I actually share this? And how can I have more self-love for myself, or like connect with myself
Mm-hmm.
in those ways? Knowing that those weren't things that I saw my mother, grandmother, great grandmother do in their lives. So
Right.
I think that, going back to your question in terms of like, what was the vision? I think really the vision was breaking the channel, like breaking the history that
Right.
had come before me, and being able to shift all those,
Conversations
yeah,
that
like,
you're stuck in,
yeah, be the
whatever.
rat that
Yeah.
doesn't do
Doesn't do
doesn't
the
do all
same
the
thing
same
over and
things.
over and over
Yeah,
again. Right.
not in the rat wheel. Just I'm
Yeah.
gonna jump off this rat wheel right now, and go in the playground instead, because there's more things to do.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. Right. Well, that's awesome. Well, so we're in the last like 9 minutes of the podcast that we
Mm-hmm.
have for you guys today, and so I just kind of like want to say first thank you for everybody who's
Mm-hmm.
watching today. I think that it's powerful and it's awesome. There would be no value to us recording ourselves talking and having stimulating conversations if there weren't other people watching. Giving feedback or creating value from it for themselves. So as we talk about self-illumination, I want you guys to kind of take it in, and how can you apply these conversations for yourself? Where is self-illumination lacking for you? Where could you highlight some behavior patterns and some reactivity and some ancestral patterns? Like what's got you? What's the lifestyle that you really want to generate, and what's stopping you from having it happen? And if it's as easy if it's so easy for you to say, oh well, it's traffic, or it's work, or it's you keep pointing outside of yourself, well then I firmly believe that you'll always stay a victim to the circumstances around you. But if you can truly see how I am generating the results in my life based on
Mm-hmm.
how I'm being, about based on my expectations, and if I have an expectation, maybe I'm already now in reactive mode, and I'm not, it's not, see, I told you so, but it's no, see, I made it happen.
Mm.
So what is the
Mm-hmm.
life that you guys want, and where can you illuminate your behavior patterns? What are
Mm-hmm.
some automatic things that are happening for you? And if you could get off of your automatic, it starts with illumination. So what do you want to illuminate for yourself? And not to say it as in it's bad. Are your patterns bad? No, they work for you. The reason you have patterns in the first place is because you learned, or we learned, that it supports in keeping us safe. It supports in making sure that we're in control of the variables in our life. It supports in being right about our expectations. It supports in some way, shape, or form, but it may not be congruent with the life that you want, the life of your vision. So that, not that it's a bad thing, it's not bad to be on automatic behavior patterns. There's a reason they're there. There's a reason that that software was installed in the first place. But now that we are raising our level of consciousness, raising our awareness, if we want to have leadership, we want to have power, right? Then how can we renegotiate the definition, the way that we define those concepts, the way that we define those behaviors, or where we apply them? Instead of understanding that those automatics work for me, and then so put them everywhere. Where can we say those automatics work here to produce the results I want, but not here? So when I'm in this position, then what can I do differently to have a different result? And I don't know if we have any feedback that you want to speak into.
Let's see here. Gia, hi Gia. Thank you so much for watching. When I take a risk, I usually succeed, and it's exciting. Yes, it is. My go-to is to be safe, practical, conservative, etc. This is a family pattern. Oh, thank you so much, Gia, for sharing and for putting that out there. That's deep. I mean, just to connect with that and to be safe. Yes. The family pattern of being safe.
And what that brings up for me is like, when people are not willing to risk. And when we do risk, what can we produce? But because we'd rather be safe or comfortable or right where we're at, we won't risk. And if we don't risk, how would we know if we were ever able to do it or not?
Yeah. I connect with that so much. There was so much safety in my family dynamics, and my mom stayed with a man who was very violent towards her and all of us. And just because her vision was to have a family. And we had a great conversation the other day about it. It was so beautiful for her to share. Like, she was just trying to create the family of her dreams. And it was being safe, not taking the risk, and there's so many things. I was in a toxic job situation, and I could have stayed in that job to be safe. And I chose to leave it without another job. I took the risk of, not having income, of stability, right, and not knowing, oh my gosh, somebody's going to know that I have this gap in my employment and what's going to happen. I moved from San Francisco to here without anything and drove across country, not knowing where I was going to land.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah. And having a friend who said, hey, how's it going? And I'm thinking, I don't know where to land. I don't know what's going to happen. It's kind of scary. But that turned into me being able to stay with her for a week, and it led to one thing to another. And I think, that being safe is it holds us back so much. And being able to take the risk, it's huge, but the rewards are so incredible. To have faith and know that your desires for what you want are going to happen.
And what that brings up for me is I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine, and his name's Paul, actually, good friend of mine. And I remember when I first moved from Atlanta, Georgia to Florida, and what actually had me move was leadership. After doing my leadership program in Florida, I decided to move there and step into like training development and get certified in whatever I had to then do this work. You know what I mean? And in my transition from Atlanta to Florida, I was talking with Paul, and Paul was like, oh, I understand. You sometimes have to let go of good things for better things, And I had to stop for that because it really made me think. And after going through my leadership perspective, I was listening and thinking from a whole different area. And I told him, and I said, listen, if I thought like that, I would rip apart my heart and my brain, going back and forth as to which one was better. Because if in comparison, moving to Florida, now I'm just comparing this opportunity to that one. And if this one's better than that one, then I'll always consider what I let go of. But what I had to do was shift my mindset. My mindset was, whether I stayed in Atlanta or I moved to Florida, whatever I create is going to be amazing. Yeah. And I'm not losing anything from walking away from Atlanta. I'm only creating in the domain of Florida when I moved to Florida. And if I decide to move back to Atlanta or move to New York or LA or whatever, then when I create there, I will create amazing because what I create. But I'm not losing anything because I didn't step in that direction. I didn't go that way.
And that's standing in the place of power and responsibility.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we're talking about, is like being able to stand in that place of power and see how you can create your
reality,
future, your reality, your present and future, rather than living from the past and living in all these things that came before you. But actually, no, you get a chance to change that.
So thank you, Lynn. I saw a comment from you. Thank you for your comment and engagement. Thank you everyone for watching. I just want to say thank you, Keegan. It's been some really awesome conversation. The conversation has been stimulating. I think we took it deep. We talked about all kinds of different ways to relate. And hopefully we opened up a lot of perspective for people who are watching and who continue to watch, because I'll be posting all of this up on social media platforms and channels from iHeartRadio, iTunes, you name it, SoundCloud, YouTube. So it'll be out there. This content's going to be out there for people to watch, and it's going to be exposed so that, people can create value from that. And in the years to come, my whole goal and my purpose is that this continues to be heard by the next generations after that. And that we can kind of, like you said, as a ripple effect, continue to impact and contribute to people. So thank you for your insight.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. This was enjoyable.
Right?
Great morning conversation. I'm ready for my day. Who else?
Yeah, so all of you guys, if anyone else is interested in joining my podcast, please reach out to me. Please connect with me. I'd love to have you on the show. It's early, 7:30, 7:45 in the morning till about 8:30. We will go. So we'll have great conversation, have some coffee, maybe some breakfast together, whatever works. I'm all about human connection in that, right? Yeah. Also, I just want to give a shout out to my laugh as a ringtone. So if you want to go on iTunes store and just search Rico's Laugh, it's only $1.29, and you get my laugh. It sounds like Desi Arnaz, Ricky Ricardo.
Great.
So I just wanted to shout out the iTunes, the podcast, Visionary Living, and then last but not least, my workshop, Successful Awareness, which I'll be hosting here in Aventura. And the next intro date is July 6th. It's a Saturday at 11 a.m. and it's a 3-hour workshop. And that's a prelude to the actual workshop date, July 20th. Which is also going to be held here in Aventura. And then I don't know if you wanted to shout out anything that you do that you want people to know about that's going on in your world real quick as we close.
Oh man, so many things. So many things. Well, if you're in the Fort Lauderdale area, I teach yoga, so you're welcome to come to any of my classes at Red Pearl Yoga. And on Monday, today is Monday, I teach meditation at Zen Mindspace, an incredible center that is integrative health. So connecting to acupuncturists, massage therapists, meditation, yoga, counseling, therapy, all sorts of things. Amazing thing. And then if you ever want to work with me, you can just call me up, reach out to me on Facebook. Love to work with individuals on having them break through and live the life of their dreams.
Awesome. I'm so honored to have had you on my podcast.
I'm super honored to be here. Rico, I think so highly of you. So this was like such an enjoyable conversation. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I love you. I love you all. Have a wonderful morning, and stay tuned next Monday for our Visionary Living podcast. I have another guest joining me, and I'll be revealing that this week. All right. So take care, everyone, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
That was awesome. No, we started at 7:30.